Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, our guest is Brian Briggeman with Kansas State University. Brian Briggeman joined the faculty in the fall of 2011 as Associate Professor of Agricultural Economics and Director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center. He earned his bachelor's degree in agribusiness from K-State, received his master's degree in ag econ from Texas A&M University, and completed his PhD in ag econ at Purdue University. Prior to joining K-State, he worked as an ag economist for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, the Omaha branch. Brian, thanks for being here. Well, let's start with a question I think to lead this off is, what is the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center?
The Arthur Capper Cooperative Center is a co-op center that focuses on research and education for co-ops. So back in 1984, Kansas cooperative leaders were navigating a pretty turbulent time. So they turned to K-State to say, we would want to form a center of excellence with the purpose of determining, developing, and delivering research and education for the cooperative community. Basically, we're in tough times now. We don't know what the future is going to look like. We need a center of excellence to help us make more informed decisions through research and education programs. So since that time, through contributions, putting on programs, the center has grown. I'm actually the second director for that whole entire time. David Barton was my predecessor, who was a professor in ag econ, kind of got it started, and then I've picked up in 2011. And for me, one of the things that's so great about it and appeals to me, why I wanted to leave the Fed to come to K-State, was this connection to a very vibrant industry. The cooperative industry really, there's a lot of interesting topics for research, education programs. I've met some great people while being here that has really informed my research program and the teaching of students, whether it's at the undergraduate level, graduate level. So having that close connection to an industry really is appealing and does great things for the Capper Center.
And who was Arthur Capper?
Well, Arthur Capper was a very prominent Kansan philanthropist, the U.S. state senator. If you look in the Topeka Rotunda, he's one of the 4 statues that is there. So when they were looking at people to, name the center, it's very natural to be with Arthur Capper because he was the U.S. senator that sponsored the Capper-Volstead Act, which the Capper-Volstead Act provides limited exemptions to the Sherman antitrust laws for agricultural marketing cooperatives. Really, it's the way that many of our farmer co-ops across the U.S. are able to operate legally within the United States through those limited exemptions that they have on the marketing side. So it made perfect sense that K-State, the land grant for K-State, that we would have the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center.
So give us an example of one of those exemptions that might otherwise qualify as antitrust.
Right. If you look at one of the reasons why co-ops were put together in the first place, so let's go back late 1800s, early 1900s, there was some success in England with the Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers, putting together people coming together to have access to competitive prices and fair weights and measures. So in the U.S., farmer co-ops, farmers in general, were looking at not having access to markets, not having access to competitive prices, in particular on the grain marketing side. Really, what it was the railroads were determining and dictating what's the price, where are you going to deliver your grain, and then how are we going to get it to the coasts. I mean, that really, they drove the market. So farmers came together and said, well, there's this cooperative model where we can pool our resources, and instead of maybe having farmers back in those days, 5 acres, 10 acres would be a pretty significant size farm. Let's put together a few hundred acres to where we can come to the market, have a more competitive position in which to, garner markets, garner higher prices. So that pooling of resources. But during those times, if you look in, and I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, so all the specifics of it, But within those Sherman antitrust laws, that's collusion, right? That's coming together to try in order to market a product. Well, a very famous ag economist from Iowa State University, Richard Norris, argued within the research literature as well as in the political landscape, but co-ops are here to create that competitive yardstick, to hold those others accountable, to say, no, we need to have competitive prices. And so, through all of that, they were able to get the legislation passed that gives that limited exemption, that no, you can come together and pool your resources and market your grain in a legal way, right? So that's how, the Capper-Volstead Act benefits farmer co-ops on the grain marketing side.
I had not heard that story. Very interesting. Co-ops, go beyond grain, obviously, and kind of run the gamut. Give everybody an example of the range of cooperatives that you deal with.
So the Capper Center primarily works closely with what I would say farmer cooperative. So these are local co-ops that are owned and controlled by farmers. So, of course, we talked about on the grain marketing side. So you think about the White Castles of the plains, right? As you drive across Kansas, you still see many of these white grain elevators and many cities and towns throughout the state. But also, too, they have on, the agronomy side, the crop input, from fertilizer, seed, herbicide, also on technology, right? And even if you think about it, access to labor, right? So for many farmers, they maybe don't own a spray rig, but they have their local co-op that's able to provide those services to them. So you have the agronomic side. You also have energy as well. So looking at, fuel for providing that diesel to the farmer owners. And then also, there's risk management practices and availability that's out there, whether that's from providing crop insurance or providing maybe input financing. So those are just some of the things that are offered. But I think at the end, it's really just that relationship, right? And having those farmers who own that local co-op to where they're hopefully a profitable business, that we're generating those profits and keeping them within the local community. So as you think about everything that local co-op can offer, and it's even beyond just the farm gate, they're oftentimes co-ops are the largest employer in their town and in their county. They also probably pay the most property taxes among all the different businesses that are there. And then also, provide scholarships, that concern for community, or a presence within the community, whether that's sponsoring a local youth sports team or showing up at the county fair and providing sponsorship dollars or possibly buying, some livestock. So it's just that integral part that I think when I think about those farmer co-ops, it's just really that local aspect. So those are the co-ops that I primarily work closely with. Also work closely with CoBank. So CoBank is part of the farm credit system. They are the primary lender to many of these farmer cooperatives. So they're owned by those local co-ops, right? So that's what we would call a regional cooperative. So work closely with CoBank as that connection within farmer co-ops. So do a number of research programs as well as education programs together jointly. And then, of course, farm credit associations, working with them. They're another financial cooperative that lends primarily to farmers. And have done, just some other work with other types of co-ops, but primarily with that connection to the farmer cooperative.
My first job out of K-State in 1996 was working for the Kansas Grain and Feed Association. And if I recall correctly, there were over 300 cooperative entities across the state. And of course, now there are quite a few less.
Correct.
How has that merger trend accelerated over the past couple of decades?
If you look at, actually, I teach a class here on cooperative management here at K-State, and next week's lecture is all about the evolving co-op landscape and looking at economies of scale and what's going on within co-ops and agribusinesses. And part of that, I do just kind of some updates, just tracking it, what's going on within Kansas. So yeah, if you go back and look in 1952, there were 364 co-ops in the state of Kansas. Today, there's 54. As I track, those co-ops and how they've changed over time, my number of 54 really looks at, where's that the leadership, the senior leadership, so the general manager, the CEO, the C-suite team, where are they housed, where are they located? And that's unique in Kansas. We have Alliance Ag and Grain. That is an LLC. It's a management LLC that's wholly owned by 6 other farmer cooperatives. So they're able to access talent, to have that, as well as scale economies. So that would be part of the 54 as you look across the state of Kansas. And it has been wide-ranging. Certainly if you look through the data going back to the 50s through today, early on, a lot of the reasons for merger was financial stress. Going through the 80s, for example, very difficult time. There were some farm policy changes that occurred that affected how grain storage and payments were made, where in the past, the U.S. government had used the country grain elevator system as a way in which to store grain, and they would provide payments in order to incentivize cooperatives in order to hold on to that grain. Well, through the 80s, policy changed and those payments went away, and a lot of co-ops got exposed, and you saw a pretty steep decline in the number of co-ops at that time. But through the 90s, 2000s, and to today, there's different reasons for these mergers that have occurred, right? And it's more within Kansas here recently. What probably is one of the main drivers that starts that conversation is a manager announces their retirement. They look to say, hey, I'm done. I'm going to move into retirement. And that's when the board of directors, right, is made up of farmers, the owners, sit down and look at all of their options. What do we do? Do we look at, a merger? Do we have a succession plan in place? Do we go out and try to hire? That kind of seems to start the conversation. But that's not always the case. There are cases where you look where 2 co-ops start to talk about where maybe it makes natural sense for us to come together. One recent one that happened last year was between Kansas and Farmers Cooperative of Cheney, where both were pretty closely connected geography-wise. Both were doing fairly well financially, so it made sense for them to have a conversation, and that merger vote passed. But it's not just, larger cooperatives that are merging either. I mean, you look across the data and time, SEK Co-op and Yates Center, they had recently went through a merger bringing in 2 single location co-ops, and it kind of motivated by, hey, we have managers who are moving out to retire. Do we want to look for another co-op so that we can still have that local ownership? So we have seen that go down, where those mergers have happened, but also too, there's, it's up to the board of directors. Do they want to merge? Do they need to merge? And that's part of the local control piece of the co-op business model, to where it really does fall to that board of directors to make that decision. What is the best for our farmer owners, the membership that we represent?
So when did we see there's some very large cooperatives out there now that cross state lines? When did that start to happen?
I started tracking this evolving landscape going back to 2016. In January 2016, if you go to the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center's website, so accc.ksu.edu, you can see that this starburst map where we started tracking it. And even in that time, back in 2016, there was some, where we had some crossing of state lines. When it really became prominent was when we had the merger between Central Valley Ag out of York, Nebraska, merged into Farmway Co-op in Beloit. I mean, Farmway was a pretty significant size co-op in the state of Kansas. CVA, of course, is a very prominent, very large local farmer cooperative based out of Nebraska that operates in 5 total states. That was really when you kind of started to see that bigger presence from other co-ops. But again, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is what's best for that farmer owner, right? I think it's important to have that local co-op control, that local co-op say, the leadership that is provided. Again, going back to the competition, right? To be able to be competitive in the marketplace. So probably around that 2017, 2018 timeframe, it really kind of started to see it a little bit more. But it hasn't. I don't know the exact dates beyond or, before that, but it's certainly, something to track as we see it going forward.
they've gotten some creativity out there, as you mentioned, like an Alliance Ag and Grain. You've got this LLC that controls the talent. Do the individual cooperatives still hold the assets then? And some have their own grain marketing entities. What are the different styles of that?
Yeah, so within Alliance Ag and Grain, the assets, from what I understand, are still at the local co-op level. And if the board of directors for that one of those co-ops wants to leave the LLC, they can, right? Mm-hmm. So that's, kind of theirs. So you also have other grain marketing entities like Co-Equity Alliance, CEA. There's another model where I'm not for sure on all of the numbers for them, but they do have that marketing. They market a significant portion of the U.S. wheat crop. So within Kansas and Oklahoma, they have that presence as well. So there's just, again, I think a lot of these different structures that are put together, there's kind of a common theme within them, and it's talent, right? In order to make sure that we have enough talent, have enough scale in order to, provide some economies of scale, some benefit to our farmer owners. So yeah, we do have some of those different types of entities here. You don't see as many in other states within Kansas. So
yeah, and of course you in cooperation with like the Kansas Co-op Council do a lot of training, provide services for all these cooperatives. What's the biggest need there? I mean, things like board of directors training. A lot of these farmers don't have that kind of experience. How has that evolved over the years?
Before the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center, the Kansas Co-op Council had done some training, but I think that was one of the needs too, right? To create a center at K-State as professors, it's kind of how we're trained, right? To provide education programs. It's just who our students are changed, whether it's undergraduates or directors or co-op employees. So if you look at what the Kansas Cooperative Council provides, they have the Director Development Program, which is provided in director training for new co-op directors coming in December. It's always held in December, and cover some of the, kind of the fundamentals of cooperatives, go through co-op finance, go through strategy, and also, too, one of the things that a director might not have as much familiarity with is you are the general manager's boss, right? So the board, the GM, the CEO reports to them. So to give them some HR training, and how do we evaluate? How do we, compensate? So, those types of programs evolve into even other ones where we work closely with board chairs on an executive director training program that they can come in and have an open discussion. So as I think about for the co-op director, I would say a big value add for them is just having that education. There was a number of directors I have talked to throughout the state that when they came onto the board, they had no idea the different skill sets that they were going to learn, the different things that was going to help improve them as a farm, right? As a farm manager, like just thinking through different situations, different issues. So that training, it kind of starts with the Kansas Co-op Council, and then you have that ongoing, with, maybe it's monthly board meetings or bi-monthly board meetings and strategic planning sessions to where you get exposed, and then having that network, right? Having an opportunity to talk about different issues that are facing them, because many of these farmers, they're going from maybe $1 million farm, a few hundred thousand, whatever their size of their revenue is for their farm, going to a multi-million dollar, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars that they are, the business that they're a director for, right? So these co-ops, over time, the scale of them has really gone up. Even for, smaller co-ops, we're handling a lot more business volume than we ever have in the past. And that just takes a different skill set, for directors. So yeah, you are correct that the Kansas Cooperative Council, and I work closely with them on director training, but it's even beyond that too. It's just that chance to work with the director, work with the co-op, work with the general manager, the CEO, the C-suite, just to improve your own skill set.
You're an economist, so let's talk about how co-ops deal with the volatility of input costs, the depressed commodity prices. I mean, there are certain advantages to cooperatives just based on market situations, but how do cooperatives help farmer customers with their risk management strategies in these times?
Well, so start with the first piece of looking at crop inputs, right, on the agronomy side. One of the things that a co-op can provide is, you would hope, like consistent supply, right? In order to have access to a regional cooperative network like Winfield United, right, in order to be able to have that supply that would be there on any sort of input, with fertilizer or seed or herbicide. The challenge for the co-op, though, is how does the co-op mitigate those input price fluctuations? Because once they come into an agreement with the farmer, there's no way that they can, price protect themselves if that inventory prices were to collapse. Mm-hmm. So most farmer co-ops, how they handle that is they just try to, align that, hey, we can secure this crop input, whatever it is, at a given price, and then try to match it as closely as they can with that sale to the farmer on the other side, and have a contract in place to where, okay, we got both ends taken care of. So I think that the consistent supply, the access to that, also just, from technology, from a understanding of how the biotech is changing, and different technology from an application standpoint is changing, that I think is what the cooperative can provide to their farmer owners. Then if you look on the grain side, it's just access to a global marketplace, right? So being able to have access to facilities that we can get our crop from Kansas out into whatever that output market is. The challenge right now, here recently, that co-ops have faced, not exclude this year, look back last couple of years, is just the drought. Mm-hmm. For a cooperative on the grain side, it's about bushels, right? We have to have bushels that flow through our elevators that we're able to find and move it. That's been a real challenge, right, for co-ops. And then you look at where we're at today, where great wheat crop, right? Looks like we're going to have a fantastic fall crop, but what co-ops are going to be able to pay the farmer, even though it's a depressed price, where's their market, right? How are they going to be able to sell it? And then you have to account for, the handling costs that the cooperative has, from storage to moving it to keeping that grain within condition. So there's, when we talk from an ag economic outlook, and a lot of folks focus in on, well, where are the markets, right? Is China going to come in and start buying soybeans? Where is this corn? Those are all real questions right now facing co-ops, is that, hey, this is great that we have all these bushels, but we need to have carry in the market, mm-hmm. to where we can capture some price appreciation from the grain that we're storing. And right now there's a lot of questions about that. So hopefully we can have some markets in order to move this big crop that everybody is expecting to come about.
Yeah, looking at a lot of bushels. There's a carry in the wheat market, and a lot of wheat being exported too. I suppose there's different ways to measure the financial health of a cooperative itself. I mean, what are those factors? Is it patronage, dividends? Is it bottom line? Is it assets? How do you judge the health of a co-op?
The short answer is yes.
Yes. All of the above.
Yeah, because when you look at the cooperative, right, they're a member-owned business. So it's creating value for the membership. Some of them is paying out cash patronage, right? Some of it is retiring equity, retained patronage that from years past, to provide that direct money infusion back to a farmer owner, right? So through patronage. For others, it's capital expenditures, right? Being able to have, you hear this all the time, speed and space. Mm-hmm. Farmers don't want to wait in line when they're dumping grain, so can we get them in and out as quickly as possible and have enough capacity in order to handle, the bushels that are coming in? But also, too, I think it goes even beyond maybe some of the financial measures, is just, employees, and having, again, goes back to talent, right? That can provide a real value add to members. It's difficult to say, like, this is the one metric, that you want to look at to say health. For me, before I went on for my PhD at Purdue, I worked for Farm Credit Services of America, mm-hmm. so I do have a bit of lender in me. So when I look at cooperative health, it's things like cash flow.
Right.
How much cash flow are you generating? And where are those sources of cash coming from? It's been, going back over the last 10 years, there's been some questions, but overall they've been able to make it through. But how are you generating that cash, right? So that really matters. And then also looking at liquidity levels, looking at working capital, because we're in a period of time where there's a lot of questions and we're going to need that working capital in order to get through maybe this time when we're trying to figure out where the markets are at. So it's difficult to say like a particular ratio, and it's going to vary across members about what they find valuable. So most co-ops, what they try to do is a blend of it, right? To try to be able to be on the paying out patronage, to make sure that we are investing in capital assets and investing in our people. So it's a challenge, right? Because it's that member value. It's not just trying to create shareholder wealth and try to drive out that biggest dividend that we can pay. It's much more broad than that.
Yeah, always challenges for management. Back in the day when I was a kid, which was a long time ago now, every co-op had the tire shop, the feed shop, and so because that's what their farmer customer needed or demanded. But as things have evolved, that's had to change. And how are those decisions made in this modern day where, this aspect of the business, maybe we're not getting that cash flow we need?
Yeah, those are difficult conversations, right? Because those types of services had been provided for many years, and many co-ops have had to say, to be blunt, they're just not profitable. And in this period of time, we cannot provide that additional service. Now, there are still some co-ops that have the tire store, that maybe have the C-store, the farm store, but that is getting smaller. Many co-ops that I talk to, when they go through that decision, it's more focused, the conversation is around, we have to get better at what our core is. What is our core? Why was this farmer cooperative established in the first place? And it goes back to grain marketing. It goes back to providing inputs, having access to those competitive prices. And if we're going to do that well, we have to hone in and focus on that. And on the same token, if a co-op wants to continue to offer, tire service or whatever that might be, how do you get more efficient in that? And can you get to be more efficient in that? That's what the name of the game is, right? Mm-hmm. Is being as efficient as possible, and in order, to drive that profits back to the member, because you have to be profitable in order to provide everything that the member needs.
Is there a thing such as co-op loyalty? Maybe it's something imagined, when we had more cooperatives, my family, you went to your co-op, right? And now it's much more competitive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely more competitive. I've heard so many people talk about how the loyalty maybe is not there like it once was. Mm-hmm. I challenge that a little bit because, it's always maybe looking back with nostalgia and just thinking about how things used to be. Of course, I wasn't around during that time and certainly not interested in tracking co-op loyalty, customer loyalty, where it is today. But it definitely is true that there's a lot more competition, especially as we've moved into an online world, right? Where we have access. I mean, you pick up your phone and you can have multiple bids on whatever product you want to buy, product you want to sell. You have such information that's there. And if you look at the current farm economy with depressed, like net farm income doesn't look very good for crop farmers, for this year. And there's a lot of questions about next year. There is this kind of, I don't know if it's just a business need where farmers feel like I have to go out and shop around all these different prices and get the cheapest price for inputs I'm buying and find the best bid for whatever I'm going to sell. That brings a whole new level of competition. And for farmer co-ops, and how do you work through that? How do you kind of build that customer loyalty? It's still a relationship business. There's still a value that is put on that. It's just a matter of, well, what is it that customer finds valuable? What is it that farmer owner of our business or potential farmer owner, what is it that they value, right? And building that relationship. And it's It's definitely easy for me to say, right? It's much more difficult when you look at the competition that is out there. But that's the challenge that co-ops have to work through, is how do we build not even just that loyalty, but just that connection to become that trusted advisor. That's what it's all about right now. That's how you create your competitive position in order to, grow the company and provide value back to the co-op member.
So what are some of the other challenges and opportunities the next 5 to 10 years? Any big policy issues right now facing cooperatives?
Well, with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that just went through, the one policy that many co-ops had talked a great deal about was Section 199AG, but that has become permanent law. Without getting into an incredible amount of detail on that tax act, but it provides a lot of value back to cooperative boards in which they can pass some of that deduction on through to farmers, so to help lower taxes for farmers, or they can use that in order to mitigate some of their taxable income. And there's some different things in co-op finance that they can do, but I did a little bit of work looking at CoBank data just to show some of the correlations between, as we see this deduction go up and more of it being available to farmer co-ops, it does allow for, you see some correlation, not causation, but correlation of cash patronage rates going up, paying out more equity redemptions, making more CapEx investments. So from a policy standpoint, that was all the co-op world talked about in 2024, but now that's permanent. Mm-hmm. So that's a big win for co-ops and something that will benefit going forward, not just the co-ops, but farmers in rural areas. Going forward, the thing that I would probably point to is what a lot of ag economists talk about when you do an outlook type of talk is, where's the markets going to be? Where are we going to be from a global position? Where are we going to be from just a domestic production and marketing? We have a system that is built in place, this cooperative system, that we can move a lot of bushels pretty quickly to get it to export markets and get it to different places. But when we have disruptions to that and questions come around that, that's when it creates a lot of pressure, right? Not just on farmers, but also on farmer co-ops. So from a trade policy, just finding ways in which to create more markets or get us established in other markets is going to be critical, not just for farmers, but also for co-ops. So if there was one policy on the revenue creation side, it's the trade policy. The other piece that's going to be real important for co-ops too is just looking at labor. Mm-hmm. And labor, I don't care what co-op you're talking to, they're going to have multiple open positions trying to find people to come in and work. So how that labor challenge is addressed, whether that's through an H-2A, faster way for H-2A workers to come in, whether it's immigration reform. I know here at the Leadership Symposium for Co-ops, a joint program that the Capper Center and the Co-op Council put on together, we had Dwayne Simpson.
You're right.
Who's the president and CEO of the National Council for Farmer Cooperatives, also a Kansan. Yes. Fort Hays State graduate. Maybe we can get him to come get a master's in agribusiness so he could be a K-State graduate.
I'll give him a call.
But Dwayne did a great job just kind of talking about the labor issues, right? And how he's working with different other agricultural entities in Washington, D.C. to say, look, we need farm workers, we need co-op workers. How do we create a way in which to, whether that's immigration reform or whatever that is, we need to have that labor. We need to have the talent. And it's not, you go talk to co-ops, we've got plenty of ability to go out and maybe get some of the higher level jobs, the C-suites. We have places, things in place that allow us to recruit and bring in that kind of talent, but it's the operational side where we need a lot, even in Kansas. Certainly if you go to California and look at some of the specialty crops, that's a whole other thing. But here in Kansas, we need to have that operational workforce, truck drivers, for example. So that would be the other big policy that we need to address. So the trade, labor, that's where we need to work.
And not to mention the institutional knowledge that is lost when a cooperative manager who's been doing the job for 30 years is retiring. getting that passed down.
Yeah. And maybe having, some of those things that are the institutional knowledge, but maybe like forgetting some of the things that were done in the past, because maybe it needs to change.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do. Right?
Yeah.
Change is always very difficult. But that's what we're faced with, right? The ag economy, the co-op landscape, things are changing pretty rapidly.
What a dynamic environment, and it really is beautiful, a very American thing, the great cooperative system that we have. And Brian, thanks for sharing all this information with us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Aaron.
Thank you to Brian Briggeman for joining me on this episode of Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have a follow-up question for Brian or a question for any of our guests, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. You can find previous episodes of Wheats on Your Mind at wheatsonyourmind.com or on Apple and Spotify. Thank you for listening.